Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching The Moore Show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. Now, for the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Dr. Jon Klimo. Now, Jon is widely considered to be the world's leading authority on the subject of channeling and author of the definitive book on the topic, Channeling, Investigations on Receiving Information from Paranormal Sources, which has been translated into 8 different languages. Now, Dr. Clemo has undergraduate and graduate degrees from Brown University in the United States and a doctorate in psychology. He's done research teaching, public presentations and publishings in the areas of parapsychology, alternative medicine, consciousness studies, new paradigm thought and new science, ufology, extraterrestrialology, metaphysics, and has also done over 100 conferences, presentations, and appeared on more than 120 different radio and television programs throughout the world. Well, Dr. Jon Klimo, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Jon, I have been so looking forward to having you on. I really have, my friend. Someone that's a PhD and that's into the channeling phenomena and has done the defining book on channeling. Thank you for everything that you've done, sir.
Thank you.
It's really an honor to have you on. And I've got a copy of your book. I'm just putting it in front of the camera now. And of course, your book and your other books will be coming up on the screen as well. And, you know, when I got this book, Channeling, it's a darn big book. It's a fantastic book. How many years of your life is within this book?
Oh, probably about 6 or 7 years all told. The problem is that in the original edition came out, Jeremy Tarsher, St. Martin's Press in the States here, came out in 1988, 87, 88. And since then, there's been so much new material that I've often been asked to add more to the book. But by then, the publisher said, well, this would be getting into 2 volumes at least. And I don't know how much we can do of that. So, and meanwhile, parts of the original channeling book about channeling scientific information and channeling extraterrestrials began to develop into sort of side books in progress, where they sort of still are. I've got about 60,000 words in each of the 2 of them, and it would more than double or triple by the time I'm done. So it becomes a series of books, really. And I don't know. I haven't been a big fire under my ass to finish all that material. As I get older and I look at my career and my life, or not needing to look at a career anymore, maybe just if you might know that Carl Jung, one of my mentors, he was a victim of, or the subject of, his own studies about midlife crisis, the midlife stuff. And I taught clinical psychologists for almost 40 years in different doctoral programs, and worked with a lot of people's dissertations, and where a lot of my background comes from, and a lot of my understandings. And Jung was one of the people that I felt closest to. He died before I never could go to a pilgrimage to meet him, but he was sort of before my time. But he really very important to have connected in the way I did to his work, and parts of it had to do with his sense of the demon, or the inner genius part of a person, which I've always identified with. And also he had that in himself. In his original Red Book, there was what he called his juvenilia. His early work was from this source, really. And some people don't understand that, or don't know what to make of it. And he didn't really either. And he kind of kept it a little bit out of the mainstream.
That's so true, isn't it? You think of the amount of material that's out there that actually has been channeled, but has never come out to say it was channeled. There's a lot.
Exactly, and it's kind of a paradox, because there's people who think they have, who think they're channeling, and I think it's probably just their own unconscious, dissociated unconscious material coming up indirectly, and that's the way they can access it, or that's their relationship with their own unconscious. And then there's another bunch of people who don't think they're channeling, and they are. So there's people who don't think they are, and they are, and people who think they are, and they're probably not. It's probably their own unconscious material. So the jury stays out about that stuff, and there's really no ultimate litmus test to verify this. So at one point with multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder, there was some brain mapping, early brain mapping of what happens when somebody goes into, clicks into a sub-personality or an alter personality, and then comes back to their own host personality, and it clicks in and out, and different parts of the brain are active during these parts. And that's one way to discern whether something is coming from the insides of a human being, what we call endophasic, from inside of them, that is self-generated essentially, or whether it is really piggybacking on them and is really not them. It's what often the channel sources say. This is I'm really different from this person. I'm not just his sub-personality.
What would it matter if it was coming within? If it's coming in as what wisdom beyond what would normally be brought through that person in their everyday, doings, yeah. Then and it's teaching information that could help themselves and others. Is there
Exactly.
really much of a discernment whether it comes internally or not? Even as we don't understand what it is in one sense, but just the quality of the information, if it's coming from within, is that just as good?
I think it's just as good, because most of my life has been devoted to not channeling or psychic or stuff. It's been devoted to what you might call a more garden variety or equal opportunity employer phenomenon or process, which is variously called creativity, intuition, inspiration, imagination, and so on. And that has really never been nobody splits hairs about or tries to go after the smoking gun of whether it comes from inside the person or outside the person. Those kind of judgment calls are really impossible to make. And my view of consciousness and of the larger universe is that it's very what we call non-local, both in physics and in consciousness studies, meaning it's not kept within the skin encapsulated ego. It's not in the cranium. It's not localized. It is a universal force field, a universal consciousness field that we tap into, and we transcend our normal consciousness, which has some claim to an aspect, a very stepped down aspect of that larger ground. And one of my favorite metaphors for this area, which is very much in the popular domain, it's been around a long time. It started with Aldous Huxley, the philosopher and writer, and he coined the term mind at large, and he capitalized it, mind at large. I don't know if he used hyphens or not. And he was very interested in mind at large. And he felt that there's a universal mind out there, mind at large, that ranges over the whole universe and probably is the universe, or is God consciousness, whatever. And we normally, our connection to that mind at large is terribly delimited and constrained in terms of what he calls the reducing valve, kind of a plumbing metaphor, that we access the universal mind by way of our own respective reducing valves, and those valves obviously reduce the larger mind to this tremendously constrained subset that is just little meager bits and pieces here and there, and that's really all we can not only lay claim to, but can existentially, phenomenologically taste and know. And channeling, I believe, is and other related self-transcending activities, processes, and experiences are ways of changing the reducing valve and dilating the aperture of the reducing valve so more comes in, which is precisely the way the experience feels to me. my experience of channeling is asking and surrendering to a kind of a self-correction or a transient episode of alteration of consciousness, you could say, alteration of the reducing valve, such that more than normal comes through for a while, and you can access it, you can decode it, you can translate it, or yeah.
So where did you study, and what did you study?
Well, I originally went to school in Providence, Rhode Island, Brown University, and I was there for a couple of years, and as an undergraduate, and then essentially, as best as I can reconstruct it, walked away from consensus reality and my own ego boundaries. I literally walked away from that for a few years, and I was gone. I wasn't me. I couldn't communicate normally. I couldn't access interpersonal interactions. I was not. I was dysfunctional, essentially, and I think I chose that. As I look back on it, I wanted the noble experiment of, like other people would take ayahuasca or LSD or something. I didn't do any of those things, but I let the reducing valve get altered in me. I asked for it. I prayed for it, actually, and that led to a series of a couple of years of really carried awayness, I guess, and disconnection. And then I came back to school a few years later and finished school and got a bachelor's and a master's degree, and then later on I got a doctorate in psychology from another institution. So that's my background, but it's really, I don't have a normal academic background. I'm very, what do you call, a polymath. I'm very interdisciplinary, and I drink from a lot of different streams, a lot of different ponds in the quest for an understanding that has to cross many disciplines. It's a pooling of it's more of a metaphysical notion that it's a meta level. The level of the physics, the level of the psychology, the level of the philosophy is a meta level. It stands outside of and overshadows those subdomains. And I like to swim around in there. And when I really welcomed it and walked away from regular reality into it, regular consciousness into it, that led to a series of a number of years of these altered states. And I've long since come back and had 40 years as a university professor and working with doctoral students. So I'm certainly more than normally functional. But there was a period when I had to go away, and
when you were teaching at universities, when did you start getting interested in the phenomena of channeling?
Well, when that question would be asked of me in the early years and early interaction with the media and so on, I would say that it all came from creativity. I began this life, as best as I can remember it, as a poet and a painter. I was a creative person. And as the years went by and my relationship to that creative process deepened, and I kind of gave myself more and more over to it, my question was, and it still is to this day, the mystery of where this stuff comes from. What's the source or the meta source of the creative process, of intuition, of inspiration? What the heck's going on? And what larger waters do we drink from when we go there? Because it does seem to go beyond normal resources of individual consciousness and energy system.
You've been doing this for many years by the sound of it, and to define it, so yeah. Well, this book originally came back from 1986, I think it was. So obviously, did you had such an interest in it that around just before that time, you were ready to commit something into it. But what made you want to do this book?
Well, at one point I came out to California before I moved out here. I moved out here in 1980. What was it? 82, I think it was. And before I came out here, I knew I wanted to be in California. I was in Long Island, New Jersey, at Rutgers University. And I wanted to come out here and didn't quite know why. Couldn't put my finger on it. Didn't know anybody out here. Didn't have any job leads or anything. And I kind of began to take leave of the East Coast connections. And when I came out here, I found myself sitting in the living room of Willis Harman, who was one of the earlier leaders of the IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences group that was started by Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut. And he was a professor at Stanford in engineering and had a house on campus there. And I went to see him just because I felt he was like a godfather. He knew a lot of people in New Age circles. And I figured, since I was kind of shy and introverted and still am, I figured I needed help. I needed an agent, a manager, a connection maker of some kind. Because once you got me one-on-one with somebody or in a group, I just go. Usually it's a kind of an open channeling, I guess you could say. So I went out to see him, and at the end of our evening, he said, you seem to know more about channeling than anybody I've ever talked with. And I said, well, I hadn't really thought about that much, and I hadn't at that point. This was 81 or 82. So but he kind of put that thought in my head. He said, you ought to really do a book on this or something. And then I found out that he had put me in touch with a writer named John White, who had written a number of books, anthologies on consciousness and so on. And White contacted me and he said, among other things, I'm an agent, a literary agent, and I wonder if you'd like me to handle your imminent channeling book. And I said, sure, we're going to use all the help I can get. So, and then he, within a matter of weeks, connected me up to a publisher or two, and it ended up being the first book.
Okay. So these people set you on course. Now, I can imagine when you initially did this book, there was channelers that are not around anymore now as well. There's a lot of names in your book that I didn't recognize, and I guess there's lots of new channelers that are here now in this field as well, isn't there?
No, it would take another 500-page book. We'd have a 2 or 3 volume set of books just about this phenomenon if I continued treating the phenomenon and researching it and interviewing people and so on the way I did for the first book, which, of course, stopped in 1986 or so.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. And okay, let's just look at the history of this phenomena as well, because I mean, the kind of early channelers were people like Edgar Casey to me, but this phenomenon's been going on since day dot. We must have been doing this back in the prehistoric times, surely.
Sure. Yes. Shamans in different Indian and kind of Aboriginal cultures were some of our earliest, I guess you could say, channels. They could alter consciousness at will, actually. They don't have the control, and they go into altered states of consciousness and leave their bodies or go to the spirit realm or ancestor realms and get information, make connections, be kind of a courier on behalf of fellow incarnate humans. But the difference between a channel and others, the difference of a shaman and others, was that the shaman could move in and out of this level of reality at will. And I've wanted to be, in a sense, I've been trying to be what you call a neo-shaman, a kind of a new version of the traditional shaman. And there are many people who I think identify with that persona or that function. And so yes, it goes way back when there would be somebody in the tribe, somebody in the extended family, thousands of years ago, many thousands of years ago, who was able to do this. And so they had an in with a communicative connection, an energetic connection to other inhabited levels of reality.
Right. And how how far back did your research go?
Well, it goes back to pre-Homeric era. It goes back to essentially Neolithic. Of course, there's no written records back then, so you sort of piece it together various ways to get a consensus across scholars, different kinds of scholars. But you begin to see a pattern that the very earliest artists, creative people, poets, storytellers, singers, were among the very first who would kind of reach up into that mind at large or that heart at large and access stories and access they were way showers, and they needed to be able to be connected to the way to be able to show it. And so that's kind of an early Western notion of a Tao, T-A-O, the Tao of this. Lao Tzu's the Tao, the Way, Tao, and that's considered an Eastern kind of a metaphysics or spiritual orientation, and I think there's a Western one too, and it involves going back thousands of years to the very earliest of us who quested for more, who whether it was by accident or on purpose, did walk away from regular reality, chose altered states of consciousness, whether it was ethnobotanical hallucinogens or anything, whatever it was, self-generated, to simply try alternative ways of being a human being in this world, and alternate ways to work with your consciousness, to work with the reducing valve and access more and different energies, consciousness, and experiential domains. And that's been what I identify with as the larger family, the extended family of my calling. And it is a calling. You are called. It's a vocational kind of a thing. And that the earliest shamans were kind of called too. And it was not often very pleasant, very lonely, could kill you in some of these vision quests and so on. You'd have to go off and just trust that it had a larger purpose. So that's how far back it goes. It goes back many, many, many thousands of years.
So when did the name channeling? Because there's different spellings of the name channeling, isn't it? There's one with double L and there's one with the single L, and I spell it with single L, but Word likes to spell it with double L.
I tend to use single L.
Yeah. When did this word come into our vocabulary, in a sense, and what does it mean nowadays?
Well, it includes a lot more than its predecessor, which I would call mediumship, or being a medium. And mediumship is a special case form of channeling that began in the spiritualist era about almost 150 years ago, in England especially, and in the States too, and in other countries, which was seemed to be a modern day version of ancestor worship. We're connecting to the dead, and usually the dead that one knew when they were alive, keeping that connection going. And that was mediumship. And so for me, mediumship is a form of channeling where the source being channeled is deceased human spirits who are still surviving in some other larger afterlife realm. So that predates channeling. Channeling is now, since probably the early 20s, the early of the 20th century, became a more inclusive term for a variety of kinds of sources of channeling, of larger reality contact making, anomalous information processing, I would call it too, forms of parapsychology that involved information and involved communication that transcends the normal constraints, interpersonal constraints of two embodied beings talking to each other. And that's really origins of channeling was mediumship, and before that it was shamanism and things like that.
Well, there's a lot more channelers nowadays coming out, and I mean, there is so many channelers. I mean, I can imagine since 1986, you've seen a massive increase in the amount of people channeling. And is channeling, a progression, as you may call it, from mediumship? But then you could also say, couldn't you, that when you channel clairvoyantly or clairsentiently or mediumistically, you could put the word channel in there, couldn't you? I channel as a medium. I channel clairsentiently. I channel clairaudiently.
Because channeling becomes a generic term for any kind of self-transcending, anomalous communication processing or communication information access that goes beyond the norm and seems to transcend. It's like the realm of parapsychology. It transcends. It goes into the para realm beyond regular psychology. It goes into in paraphysics version of parapsychology, the para goes beyond normal physics. So if you're going to explain things in physics-like ways or biophysics-like ways, you have to transcend the normative ways of talking about how communication is sent and received, and what the loci, the stations from which and to which consciousness is is moving between. And if you believe in non-local consciousness like I do, that's really it's distributed over the whole universe. It's really the kind of the mind of God, as far as I can tell. It's a universal living being, and that is, you have to kind of throw aside some of the traditional, antiquated notions of communication. You've got a sender and a receiver. You've got an encoder of information and a decoder of information. You've got in your brain, you've got Brokaw's speech center that generates speech, and you've got Wernicke's comprehension center to comprehend speech. So you have these parts of the brain. And so we got this traditional notion of a speech generator and a speech comprehender or receiver, and they're localized. They're localized within a cranium, within a body, within a skin-encapsulated ego. And that's a kind of a traditional way of thinking. But channeling nowadays, for me, it kind of gets into universal mind. It gets into a oneness. It gets into a really a mystical notion of something that transcends physics, transcends psychology, and so that's always been my home. That's where I went away into to study this many decades ago, and I'm still absolutely fascinated.
What about the idea that it brings in teaching information?
Sure. Well, sure. We teach ourselves, we teach each other, and then there's a whole host of, like an angelic host, a disembodied, a discarnate host of further teachers who are teaching us, who live somewhere else. We have a multidimensional house of many mansions out there in the universe, and it is inhabited. It is inhabited by all manner shape of creature and being and intelligence, and that's always been my kind of home. When the night stars come out and I stand under them, I just get all haunted and inspired and carried away. That God knows we're not alone, and God knows there's intelligences and wisdoms and heart beings out there that put our local planet pretty much to shame, except for a few exceptions. And so it's been very hard. Yeah, it's been very hard for me to stay. Hard for me to stay here. That's why I think I ran away, both figuratively speaking and literally speaking. I ran away from regular reality, consensus reality, when I was about 16 or so, and didn't come back for a few years. I was a runaway. And when I did come back, I was ready. I made a deal inside myself. I was going to work within the system. I was going to work or draw within the lines, not outside of them in the coloring book. And I've tried to do that ever since. I mean, teaching in doctoral programs and helping people do their dissertations for 40 years is definitely tethering myself to a real delimiting discipline system. And for somebody who tends to be much more unbridled, whose calling, whose vocation is to just a larger universal oceanic ground of just multifaceted extraordinary being and content realm, it's very hard for me to stay home, so to speak, at least in this level of reality where normal consciousness comprises our group mind and our group cultural shared grounds. So I always want to get away from those shared grounds, and that's what the artist does, the shaman does, the loner does, the mystic, the visionary. And channeling is simply when you are doing that and your altered state of consciousness and the content that it can access thereby, you make it available to other people, and you have some control over it. You can be a writer, you can be a speaker, you can whatever, and that's really what I identify with. That's a larger definition of channeling, which is you're a channel. It stays within the limits of the riverbed. It doesn't outstep the riverbed and flood everything else, although it sometimes feels like it's gonna, or other people feel like you're gonna flood them.
We are never channeled, are we? Nothing ever channels us. I never feel that anything says to me, okay, well, just sit down for a minute, Kev, and we're going to channel you now because we want to hear from you. We've got questions from you. Do you think that's because and the same goes for when we channel an entity or when we channel a group consciousness or a departed loved one or whatever it may be, we're not connecting with them in real time. We're connecting with their consciousness side that's out of time.
One of the problems challenges of the whole channeling domain is that it's one way to look at it is that people who are channeling don't think it's enough to be themselves, to access what their own consciousness can access, and so they take on the role of being a channeled source other than themselves, and that gives them permission to go beyond their normal bounds and boundaries and resource access and to get more. And because we're not enough the way we are. Now, I'm not saying I subscribe to this, but most people, I think, see themselves as not enough and not very interesting compared to Hollywood and the starlet system and bigger than life, hyped up, hyperbolic, this and that. And so channeling is one way, at least the critics look at it this way, that you can take on a persona, take on a not yourself source, a not yourself wisdom that you can go to and allow yourself to access that more than normal you. Now, that presupposes that normal you is not enough for you or for other people. It's not interesting. You got to jazz it up a bit. You got to put it on steroids or something. You got to put a frame around it that says this is not just Jon Klimo. Even on a good day, this is more than him. This is more than most of us. And so therefore attend to what falls within that picture frame. It's beautiful, it's special, it's an aesthetic experience. And that's what I think happens in the channeling. People are forewarned, this is a transcendental source. So pay attention. Whereas if you don't have that frame around it, you don't mean it.
Could you apply that then to the Seth material? Could you apply that then to Daryl Anker? Could you apply that to most channelers, that actually what they're bringing through is is not what we think it is, in the sense that, yes, the information's good, but to say it's when we put those, when there's voice altering, or there's shifts in their personality, are you saying those shifts are happening because they never thought they were powerful enough in the first place to be themselves and just to bring the information through without that kind of change in their personality? Exactly.
What I'm betraying here is a deeper perspective, or a deeper thesis I'm selling, which takes me decades to get to, which is it's the ultimate egalitarian or democratic view that we all have potential equal access to universal mind. We are potentially all gods with a small g, eventually pieces of God with a large G. That we are that. That's our heritage. That's our birthright. But that's been so demeaned and demoted and degraded over the centuries, and with all these local drummers we step to, all these cultural delimiting games we play, the social media small fry talk, that how could you ever think you could self-transcend those incredible limits that you and your neighbors are all operating under in this kind of group mind, group think thing? But that's really, I think, what's going on, is that potentially the truth can set us free, and the truth is that we all have potential access to this universality. We can all be magnificent channels with magnificent wisdom sources, open, flowing, radiating, contagious hearts that we could be communicating, and we could be transcending all the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies local knowledges if we wanted to, but we don't think we have it in us, and so we do indirect things like channeling. Now, that doesn't mean that channeling isn't legitimate and isn't as defined. It is self-transcending, and those sources, I do believe the sources that are being channeled are separate from the person channeling them. But where does it all end up residing within? It all ends up residing within a universal being, a universal polyglot group consciousness mind, living Godhead, I think. And within all that, we're all pieces of that. We're all parts of it. We're all talking to each other within that, and there is no outside. It's all inside. It's a vast interiority, and that's once you put that frame around it, that frameless frame, then anything goes. What does it matter whether you're talking about a channeled entity or a channel or a non-channel or somebody who's delusional? It's all happening in that one giant container where all is possible, and that's where I've tended to always be. I'm more inclusive of hell, everything's possible.
Sorry, I've got confused there. Are you saying then that when someone like Darryl Anka brings through the channel, are you saying that he doesn't have to change personality, that he could just be himself?
I think that in a true shared telepathic milieu, climate, environment, you don't have to keep switching channels to show that now it's me, now it's not me, now I'm talking to source X on a big electromagnetic, electric circuit here, or radio circuit. That's a certain stage of locating ourselves, of demarcating a mapping system, a topology, a typography, so that we can keep track of this thing that's going beyond normal Cartesian domains, beyond time and space, beyond normal clocks and rods and measurement devices. And as we move closer into that, it's very hard to get our bearings. Now, who am I talking to? Is that Bashar or is that Daryl? I mean, I remember after I set up a whole thing at the International UFO Congress a number of years ago. The whole day was set aside to channeling extraterrestrials, and they asked me to set that whole thing up. And so and Daryl Anka was there, many others were there channeling, and I gave the keynote talk at the beginning of the day. And I got up there and I was talking about, the whole time I was standing there talking about the subject matter, which was introducing the day and what's going to happen and what people are going to be talking about, some of their entities and the process of channeling in general. And then I sit down, and Daryl Anka stands up in the audience, and he looks over at me, and he points to me, and he says, "Now that's what I call channeling." So how do you identify these? I didn't think I was channeling. I was inspired. I was carried away. I was possessed. Something was moving through me. I was a channel for things, mind at large, beyond me, coming through me. And that's my favorite definition, operationalization of what channeling is, because it isn't just Jane Roberts and then Seth and then all the wonderful stuff. Seth is my favorite channeled entity, by the way. So.
But I think what you're saying, without getting stuck on this part, is that we all have this innate ability, and is there a progression in channeling where we don't have to, we can just be ourselves, and just as I'm talking to you now, I could channel a higher aspect of myself, or I could channel something that wants to work with me. But is that, I don't want to take away anyone's work. I mean, if someone needs to change their personality to channel, or they need to shift from who they are to something else, then I guess that's what they need to do. But are you saying they don't need to do that? I mean, let's just be really blunt here and just be with long answers. Let's just get to the point. Do we need to do that?
Right now we do. Yeah, I think we do. Because it's too much to ask to step out of yourself and into some kind of God consciousness, let's say, and speak from that place, that kind of omniscience. That's extraordinary. And we have very few historical models for that, of fellow incarnate human beings who've been able to do that.
Because Daryl has said as well, and I'm going to ask him in this interview as well again, that he just calls this entity Bashar and says it's a future aspect of himself, but that doesn't mean it's actually that. So it's probably not that then.
Well, look, it depends. Again, we're trying to find maps and meaning systems and names and locations and vectors and all this stuff to make a larger systematic understanding of a larger reality that transcends physics and psychology and sociology. And he said this to her, and she had a body, and he didn't have a body, and it gets very complicated. So, is there a larger reality in which Bashar, who is channeled by Daryl Anka, has an individual autonomous identity and has its own source of information? Yes. Is there a Seth out there in the universe at the time Jane Roberts was alive, and since she's died, that's different than Jane Roberts? Yes. When I connect with something, I could call it mind at large. I could call it my higher self. I don't know what the hell I'd call it. It's just something's taken over, and I'm moving into another level, and then I'm not going to stay there because it's kind of too much to take, and it kind of wears other people out, and so you're going to come back home. You're going to put your mask back on, put your local incarnate localized mask, and sound and talk like other people around you, so you don't freak them out. And I think that channeling is a way for us to outstep our normal limitations periodically and bring more in and enrich the pool, the consciousness pool and the information pool that we human beings have to draw from right now. And we desperately need to be drawing from transcendental sources, because most of the sources we draw from within ourselves is terribly limited and polluted by the localized constraint system of the culture we're in. And it's a kind of stupid level for a lot of this compared to what we could be drawing from. I do not want to go on record saying that Seth isn't the Seth, that there isn't a Seth, there isn't a Bashar, there isn't all these other entities. The entities are as autonomous as they feel they are as autonomous and different than the channels think they are. They're whatever they are. It's a both end. But when you go beyond kind of garden variety channeling with its entities and its sources of entities and its channels of entities, there's something that lies beyond that contains all of this, and that's the crosstalk within a universal mind, so to speak.
Yeah, well, there's less trance channelers nowadays. There's less trance channelers, less and less. The more channelers that I'm coming across are actually in real time. Yes, there's a bit of a change in the personality, but not much. There's maybe just a slowing down of the voice, maybe just tiny bits of change, but, it's not major change. It's not major change. I don't know if you've noticed that at all, that it's less and less trance channeling.
Yeah. There was a time when it was expected. It was expected of the individual by him or herself. It was a tradition you had joined, and you felt more comfortable taking that role on of channeling that way with that kind of disconnection, that kind of switching gears in your consciousness, so that just like if we have a brain mapping system on you, you can see the discontinuous jump, the quantum jump in consciousness and neurophysiological energy level and processing that occurs when somebody moves into a channeling state. And I think all that happens. And sure, it happens. But I think eventually you don't have to. You oil the gears enough that you don't have to have these discontinuities.
Yeah, I think so, and and some people may say, well, that's just because there's a shift in the energy. There's a shift in the way, that there's something that's changed out there in our evolution of our soul. That's why it's happening. But who knows, right? But there is a shift going on in the way this information is brought through. Now, why are they coming through? I mean, mostly it's because they're trying to help. They're trying to bring through teaching information and to improve our present moment. That's what seems to be happening. And there's some channelers out there as well that also talk about the idea that 99.9% of what's being brought through is actually not what we think it is, and it's actually not helping that much.
Well, yeah, all kinds of people can be making these judgment calls about where it's coming from and whether it's good or not, or whether we should be giving our power away. That other notion that when you're channeling, you go away from your own innate, intrinsic inner guidance and demons and genius and truth, and you go to this place where you take on a dissociated relationship with another being, another part of the larger creation, that you turn the talking stick over to them rather than hold on to it yourself. And so there's a certain subculture of critics in the channeling movement from its beginnings that say channeling is not good because you're giving your power away, as the saying goes, and so on and so on. Well, I don't think you have to give your power away at all, and I don't think it is necessarily giving your power away. It's a kind of a co-dwelling. You have a foot in two worlds, and you are a goodly translator, a go-between, a bridging, and I put a lot of my time and energy as much into into extraterrestrial UFO kind of stuff as I do into channeling, and they're overlap because I said I've done almost a whole book on just on channeling extraterrestrials. But there's a relationship to extraterrestrials that has nothing to do with channeling, although most of them seem to come from a telepathic place. When you connect with an alien culture not of this planet, the communication of choice within themselves and when they communicate with us and us with them is telepathic. That seems to be saying something. That's sort of what I'm alluding to here, that we're moving toward that evolutionary jump in moving into a shared mental space. And when you move into that shared mental space, then what does it really matter whether somebody is within a locus within that frame of reference, that higher dimensional frame of reference, is calling itself Seth or is Jane Roberts or is Jon Klimo or is Kevin, or it's localizing a non-local situation, and it's necessary at this level of our evolution to have a kind of a shared culture where we talk about transcending things, about beings that are not located at a physical level of reality, so that we have a common denominator. But to jump immediately from, we're all God consciousness to that place is too much for most people, especially when they look around at their fellow beings who are about as far from God consciousness as you could possibly ever get. We're in purgatory here. And so why is there so much channeling going on? Why now? Why is there so much extraterrestrial connection going on now? And it's just as much of that. Because we deeply need this larger understanding, this larger, the bird coming back to the ark with an olive branch in its beak, a show telling of a larger reality that's inhabited. We're out here for you. And we've been around for millions of years or billions of years. Hang in there. Don't blow yourselves up. And we can't really rescue you from yourself. You've got to learn the hard way, maybe. But we're going to give you enough information and enough perspective to see this course through at a very difficult period in your planetary and species-specific evolution. And that's why all the channeling, and that's why all the UFO connection. And I'm as involved with that as I am with the channeling part, whether it's channels connected or nuts and bolts saucer's landing part.
I think all the ufology is going to consciousness. It's that's the way that a lot of the new researchers have gone into as well. That it's gone from nuts and bolts more to consciousness based, and that the older researchers now who won't be with us forever, their work will live on. But I think it's there's a new paradigm of UFO researchers, and it all points to consciousness.
Yes, and if you're pointing to consciousness with not only with the ufology domain, but also the channeling domain, what is, as we point more and more toward this more inclusive consciousness paradigm to understand these things, how does that then apply to channeling? And I think it's moving beyond entity channeling. That's what I believe. It doesn't mean that entity channeling stops. It doesn't mean that the entities that used to be channeled by channels isn't really there. It's just the minds of the end of the channelers. No, it's all the way it has been. But we're moving to a more inclusive, containing place, a vast interiority, as I call it, which is really it all resides within consciousness, the universal consciousness field.
And I think some of the newer channelers coming out, they do not even name who they're bringing through. It has no name. There's no name. And that's I actually prefer that personally.
That's what I'm telling you, is I'm essentially coming from that place too. But as a student of the whole history of channeling, including the whole next to most recent period when it was really entity channeling, altered state, trance channeling, and so on, that's I say I understand all that, and I include that in my teaching and my talking and my heritage, the heritage I'm part of. But I'm more interested now in the post-entity channeling consciousness field, more inclusive, oceanic thing, the mind at large our local minds are drinking from as the evolution oils our reducing valves to make us be more to have the larger reality accessible to us, the larger consciousness accessible to us.
Yes, and we're almost up in time now. 51 minutes has just disappeared, and yeah, I mean, when we channel, and it's our innate ability to be able to do this. We're connecting to some timeless realm. That there seems to be answers to why things are the way they are in some respects, but I wonder how illusionary it is. I wonder if it wants to be found out. I wonder if agreements before we came here allow us to go deep enough to find these questions of why things are the way they are. If we've kind of shut ourselves off to have this experience, can it ever be discovered?
I think incrementally, bit by bit, we're awakening to this larger understanding, this larger reality, this larger consciousness, this larger shared consciousness, and we're moving toward it. But it's painfully slow. I mean, this incarnation for me is almost over now, and whether I have 5 or 10, 15 more years left, it doesn't make much difference, because I'm embedded within a consensus reality that is pretty stifling and pretty purgatorial. And that's not to say that the people I'm surrounded by aren't sons and daughters of a living God and don't have a piece of the action of the universal consciousness. They do, but it is so minuscule, so meager. I feel like a pig's talking this way, but I want there to be more. That's why I walked away from reality. That's why when I came back and I give talks, I tended to talk well beyond the 51 minutes. I tended to want to say it all at once. The pressured speech, the almost manic unipolar mania of wanting to say it all at once, of wanting to awaken everybody. That's always been my goad, my inner drive, and it hasn't gotten any less now in my 70s, for God's sakes. I'm not setting my sights any lower, and the energy that comes through me, the inspiration that calls to me, is no less. And that's because I want there to be more awakening and understanding and participation in all of this.
No, 1,000, yeah, beyond a named percentage, I agree with you, right? Yeah, absolutely, and that's so important what you've said there as well. I mean, maybe, when we all go back home, we'll all realize that the only person we were waking up was ourselves. And, the illusion was you thought that everyone else was asleep, but it was only you that was really asleep.
There's that perspective too. You're right.
Yeah, whatever this is, in this documentary, Jon, I just really want to look at to see if there's another framework that hasn't come out yet. Is there a framework of spirituality that has not come out yet, that the coming out or the framework of would help us to awaken even quicker and go beyond what we've already know? Is there a new version of spirituality out there? Is there? And why has all the information that's come through always been the same? And all we get from that is truth. Well, yeah, truth is truth up to the level that you're at. How can we go beyond the level of truth that we're at?
Well, these are all questions I ask myself every day of my life. And so you and I are in the same boat there, and I think we're on the same mission. And I think it's possible to address, if not completely answer, some of these questions you're throwing out here now at the end. And I think partly what this documentary we're going to do is can help with is to show the way, to show some glimpses, some illusions, some arrows pointing certain ways toward what's going to happen next. And I think channeling is simply a special case metaphor for human experience at this point in our evolution and human understanding and our place within the larger universe, this post-Copernican revolution where we're no longer the center of the universe and we're trying to comprehend and handle the fact that we're being put in our place in a humbling way when so much of our local reality on this planet has been just so self-lionized and self-aggrandized as if we're the only show in town. And the channeling and the extraterrestrial stuff and all the others, the altered state stuff, it shows that there is just so much more. And then where do we place these new levels of understanding? In what system, what more inclusive metaphysical system are we going to be placing it? And that's the challenge that people like you and I have.
And this is why I want to do an in-person interview with you and spend most of the day with you, because, you know, trying to do it over the phone right now, I'm just finding it bloody impossible, right? You know, it's just really difficult because you've got so much to say, and I need to be in person with you to have these kind of conversations. I really want them because, you know, I feel that my life is dedicating more to channeling, which I never even thought my career was going that way, but I've got the domain name now, channeling.com, and I'm doing the documentary, and it's going to be more than one documentary, and I'm like, oh God, man, do you know what? You just can't fight it sometimes, can you? I mean, your life has gone the same as well. You've really have devoted your life to this. You know, I know you've done other things, and so have I. But I mean, the latter part of your life has been devoted to this work for a reason. And I would like to, you know, give you a platform to at least, you know, get as much out of you as we can do for the documentary and for my talk show. So listen, Jon, I know we've so many unanswered things here, so much we never covered, and
it's a great way to leave it, isn't it?
I think it is, brother, because I cannot wait to see you, and I cannot wait to be in your company and really dive as deep as possible with you.
Well, you're a good person to go diving with because we're similar minds. I think similar passions and life desires to be doing this lifetime. There's enough similarity there that we could dive together. That doesn't often happen.
But I really, really, really appreciate you coming on, Jon. And just remind the audience of your website.
It's www and my name, Jon, there's no H in John, www.jonklimo, Klimo.com. And I apologize ahead of time for people who are aficionados of websites. I do not update my websites. Years go by sometimes. Nothing new's been added to it. I need a kind of a blog thing. I need help in how to do almost weekly additions to a website with new information because it's all there. But I don't go to the. I don't even remember how to run my own website or add anything to it. So with that apology in mind, that whatever's there is there.
Well, if anyone listening to this can help Jon with his website or feel drawn to want to, you know, help Jon to get a new website or whatever to help Jon out, then I'm sure that maybe someone can. But I would also point you in the right direction for that as well, because I really want your work to be out there as well. So when I come see you. So listen, Jon, I just want to thank you so much, brother, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person in a couple of months.
Sure. Good. I look forward to it too, Kevin.